Perfect.
Okay, so today I want to show a preview of how our users will work with Bonsai in version 2023. So the features I'm showing are going to be in beta in November and released in December. So ignore the 2022 up at the top. That's not correct. So yeah, I wanted to walk through an example and then kind of show the new workflow that we're planning. I guess the big news is that we're really trying to simplify and make our integration with Bonsai a lot more slick. I'll explain this little sample model first. The concept in this model is that batches of items arrive, and there's 10 items at a time, and each one needs to spend some time on each of these 4 machines. So the concept is that maybe this is kind of inspired by a sheet metal operation, and these are each custom jobs. So maybe they spend some time on the cutting machine, and then some time on the bending machine, and then maybe they need another step and maybe painting. So there's kind of these 4 stages, and they each require different amounts of time on each of the stages. And so your throughput can be really affected by the order you do things in, just because they run into each other. So if we watch this model run, if you can kind of see every time an item gets held up by an item in front of it, it starts to turn a little bit darker red, like it's angry, like it's been blocked, and so it's been held up by items in front of it. So theoretically, in a good sequence, we would see very, very little red. And in a bad sequence, we'll see lots of red. And so depending on which job happens after each other job, we can really monitor performance. And so I've made this kind of sample model. When the batch finishes, I kind of put, this is sort of a 3D chart of how long did that batch take. And right now it's just doing choosing random options. So I want this to be an AI model. And so the way I'm framing this for the AI is that I'm showing it a list of all the jobs that are available. So the last time it made a decision, there were 3 jobs, and the AI can see the time each of these jobs is going to take. And it can also see what's in progress on these stations right now. And so that's kind of how it's going to choose to make good decisions. So the hope is that it would learn, oh, these values are high and low, and they match up really well with these other values. So I'm going to do this one next, and then I'm going to do that item. So the AI is going to choose one at a time. I'm going to do this job, and then I'll do the 3rd job, and then I'll do the 1st job, something like that. And in the end, the AI will choose a good sequence. So this is kind of a classic example of what we might want to train an AI to do. So if we go to the reinforcement learning tool, there is a new tab. We're going to use Bonsai, so we do need to make sure the observation space and action space are set to use Bonsai. But there's a new tab called Bonsai. And so I'm going to kind of walk through the workflow a little bit. So now that I've got this model and I've got some my observation space and action space chosen, I'd really be cool if I could do a quick test to see if I'm communicating with Bonsai. So for testing and debugging, we can come to this section at the bottom, the unmanaged simulator section, and you can click register simulator. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And it's going to say I'm registering, registration succeeded. Now I'm waiting for Bonsai to tell me what to do. So let's go ahead and go to the Bonsai interface. So over here in the Bonsai interface, this is my browser at the Bonsai website. If I look at my list of simulators, I can see that I have a FlexSim model that says it's an unmanaged simulator. This entry here corresponds with the fact that I've registered this instance of FlexSim. And that means that I can use it to train. So I'm going to come to my brains, and I have a job scheduling brain. And It looks like I need to do this step really quickly. This brain happens to have something called a programmed concept, so I'm building it. Shouldn't take more than 20 seconds. But once it's done being built, we can use our we can train using the unmanaged simulator that is currently running on my PC. So if I click this train button, it says, hey, here's your unmanaged simulators, and I can go ahead and say train with that. And it's going to connect to simulators. This takes about a minute. I don't know exactly what it needs to do during that minute, but it takes a little bit. And let me put FlexSim and this interface side by side. So Bonsai is still working on connecting to simulators. FlexSim still kind of reaching out to Bonsai for instructions. And hopefully this connects in the next few seconds. And there we go. Bonsai runs a few test iterations to pick an algorithm. And so it chooses an algorithm for you. And in this case, it chose an algorithm called Apex. But it's got 2 other algorithms that it can use. But it runs some samples and then uses those to determine which one it should run. And so now that it's determined that, it's getting some more things set up to continue training. But this is probably far enough for our tests. We feel really good that our Inkling code and that our simulator line up. Already we verified quite a bit of progress. So you can continue to let this train and watch FlexSim. And if FlexSim gets exceptions, you would check those out and maybe try to debug your model this way. But once you're satisfied with debugging your model, you don't really want to train. You don't really want to train using the unmanaged simulator. There's several reasons for that, but most of them come down to plain speed. For example, the unmanaged simulator takes a long time. There's a lot of lag. So just to send the message and then receive the request back takes a little bit longer. In addition, an unmanaged simulator, you can only use one at a time. So the training algorithm can only rely on one FlexSim at once. So then the question becomes, how do you train faster and with more simulators? And the answer to that question is to create something called a managed simulator. Last time I presented on this topic, creating a managed simulator was a huge pain. You had to install Python, you had to install Docker, and you had to do all kinds of building containers and all sorts of things. We have really streamlined this process. Now, all you need to do is click Export Simulator Package. I'm going to save it as sim2.zip. And it thinks for a little bit. And here's my sim2 package. And when I click Add Sim in Bonsai, you'll notice that FlexSim is an option. Now, FlexSim is currently an option only in alpha, so this isn't available to the public yet. But this is what it will generally look like. So users who are using Bonsai will say, oh, I want to add a FlexSim simulator. That's really neat. And then all you have to do is drag your zip file over and say, I'm going to call this job scheduling, because that's my model. And then I'm going to name it 3 because I have a bunch of them already. And so then you can click Create Simulator. It uploads your files, and then it thinks for 3 or 4 minutes on this step here where it kind of says I'm working on making the simulator. There's some steps it's doing in the background. But I happen to, like a cooking show, I have done this morning, and this is the simulator that I made. You can notice some neat things when you click on the simulator. We've added features so that you can see the observation space and action space in correct Inkling code. So this says, I know that FlexSim is going to observe job times, and that's a 10-row, 4-column array. And that it has some other observations, and that its action space is choosing 1 of 10 jobs. And so we can see some really nice things. And once you do that, once you have a managed simulator, you can actually train with it. So much like a cooking show, I've started training this morning, and you can see that it's been working on it for a while, for the last 2.5 hours. It has launched, it's using 23 concurrent FlexSims at the moment. And you can kind of see that they're each training along. You can actually look at your list of instances that it's using and kind of see how each one is doing, kind of look at each chart individually. And over time, if training is working, then you'll be able to see that it's getting better and better. This one hasn't finished training yet, hasn't quite figured out how to sequence those jobs at this particular time. But yeah, that's kind of the new workflow. There's just those two main features, one being able to register an unmanaged simulator and the other being able to export a simulator package that's really easy to create. So in both cases, it's much, much, much easier to work with Bonsai. So yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to show today. Are there any questions?
No idea where to start, Jordan.
So have you ever, is this scenario something like, can you conceptualize how to use OpQuest for this as well as Bonsai?
Not in this scenario. So
No.
OpQuest is like in a sports analogy, OpQuest makes decisions like what team should I use for the year? Like what players should be on my team? Like if I was an American football coach, I might need to make the decision, what players do I want on my roster? That's like an optimizer decision. You make it kind of one time.
Mm-hmm.
The AI is your players, right? You want to train an AI the same way you'd train a player. So the player is going to make good calls they're going to take in the situation. They're going to look around and see where everything's at and see where the ball is and very instantaneously decide what to do. And they need to do that over and over and over and over again during each game. And we want to make an AI, like an AI is a player or a worker or an employee like that we're training.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's very, very different output, right? The optimizer could do a single sequence, right? In this case. And some of our customers do this, right? They say, well, I've got a single sequence for the day and I'll just run the optimizer every day. But sometimes that's not possible because maybe work changes quickly. Or maybe it takes too long for the optimizer to find a good answer. And so if you train an AI, then you can train the AI to make those decisions quickly and you kind of don't have to worry about it. You don't have a manual step of, I'm going to run the optimizer and then feed its input into the system. It's an automated step of just the AI is already trained. It knows what to do.
Gotcha.
So anyways, that's
Jordan.
Yeah.
I have a question. Would you suggest, we didn't try the previous version yet, but we are going to, would you suggest that is it better to wait until the beta and try this new workflow, or
I would probably start working on it now. It's kind of a pain, but there's lots of things to think through that are not the Bonsai workflow, right? Right now, the Bonsai workflow is a little bit trickier and requires Python and Docker. But the big questions when you're working with AI are, what is my observation space? How do I make decisions and how do I make a model that works with those decisions? And so if you have a project in mind that you're excited about, I would get started on it now and answer those questions. And then when this comes out, your life just gets easier, but not necessarily, it's not like you can't use Bonsai, right? And there's a lot of work that is definitely an overlap.
Because right now we had set up some toy projects to train, but with the original reinforcement learning tool and training locally.
Yeah.
And so it seemed like the setup of the Bonsai, having to enable it in Azure, was quite complicated. So no one
Yeah.
had time to try it.
Yeah, so
to
there's
actually
kind of
try
a
it.
bunch of steps when using Bonsai that, like with Gym, it's all Python, it's all on your local machine. It's maybe not easy to set up, but not necessarily. It's long or tedious, but not complicated. With Azure and Bonsai, yes, you need to get set up with a Azure subscription, and then you need to add a Bonsai workspace and get all that kind of thing sorted out. And that's still part of the workflow with or without these changes. These changes focus exclusively on how hard is it to make a simulator in Bonsai, right? How to create FlexSim as an environment that Bonsai can use. And that is much, much easier now.
Yeah, it certainly looks like an improvement.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you say, Jordan, the majority of the work in doing an AI model though is building the model, setting up your observations, setting up everything that Bonsai uses or even OpenGym uses to
Yeah.
train
And I mean,
AI.
in Bonsai, right, I've glossed over this Inkling file, but it took me my real one here. I mean, I had looks like 47 versions of this brain where I fiddled with various things until it started training well. But even that process will get faster with this new change where you're making a new simulator, right? If you change your simulator, this process really speeds things up. So, but yes, most of the work is, getting your model right and then finding an inkling or a set of like, what should I be minimizing or what should the goals of my optimization be? If you're using Gym, you're setting up rewards, which is especially tricky. In Bonsai is more like the optimizer where it lets you pick a goal, like please minimize this value or maximize some other value, or don't let this value drop below a certain level, that kind of thing. But yeah, even so, it's important to get those right, and the first try is almost never it.
Yeah, and it's looking at a real situation. The person has to be pretty skilled and a data scientist to actually understand the process and then be able to write the observation space and I guess you call this an Inkling file, to write that to actually train that AI the way you want it trained. I mean, that's the big hurdle, isn't it? To train it the way you want it to be trained and just not hope it works.
Right. So one nice thing that you can do in Bonsai is you can kind of check its progress as it goes along. So if I click on this, you can see there are some assessments. So you can always run a custom assessment, and I just want to run one episode that's got maybe 100 iterations. And this is just my demo assessment. And you can actually do that on your live FlexSim with an unmanaged simulator. So if I open this up and say I want to register this simulator again, so it's registered now, so I can generate my assessment and then run it. And I can use my unmanaged simulator. And so that basically lets me watch to see what am I learning while I'm learning. And so if you get a long ways in and you don't feel like you're learning something, like you can always kind of check on it and kind of watch your model run and see if the AI is learning as fast as you'd like. And so you can kind of check on it that way. If that makes sense. Bonsai always takes a couple minutes to complete any action, it seems like. But that's the concept, is you can see how are you doing so far. And so in that way you can kind of check on it. And then if you decide to make some changes to either the simulator, the FlexSim model, or the brain itself, right? And see, this is actually interesting. It looks like it's already kind of learned how to put more items in the good section than in the poor one. And so right now it's like 6, 4, and 1. And if I just kind of reset and run and look at the Actually, I need to unregister the simulator. Can't run the model while you're registered as a simulator. Like there's more, the ratio ends up having more stuff in these medium, acceptable and poor performing versus good, where the AI had just barely showed that it had more in the good side. So it's already learning something. But you could use this, right? And make sure that your model's not getting stuck in a weird space or whatever you need to do. So it's a little bit easier to debug as well while you're training.
Could we apply these to the 2 models we used in the class last winter?
So the class last winter, yes, the last winter class made it easy to set up rewards, and you can set up rewards in Bonsai, but I would probably make a few changes. It wouldn't take too long to update them to use Bonsai instead of Gym, but there would be some update process for those models.
Perfect.
So yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Thanks, Jordan. I'm sure everybody is just understands everything you did here.
Thanks. Cool.
All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and stop recording, and then if there's anything else that we need